Hello, welcome to Stitch 22. This is week 21, the penultimate week of the series. This week I'm going to show you how you make lacy effects, insertion stitch, traditionally known as, between two spaces within a piece of fabric. So I want you to cut your piece of fabric into section in half at least, and then we're going to attach it to a background paper temporarily. You see this one I've tacked on, and I've started a stitch across the spaces, which I'll explain more clearly afterwards, but no stitching comes through to the back, only the tacking, and then the tacking is cut away, and then the whole piece is a free hanging interesting lacy piece of fabric. You first of all need to start with your backing fabric. Find some old recycled brown envelope, something quite tough, because you're going to have to do this to it. You could even stamp on it and squeeze it. You have to crumple it up and then open it out, and you can see it'll rip if you have a fragile piece of fabric paper. And then scrunch it up again until it's really nice and soft and supple, almost leather-like. And then you're going to tack your fabric pieces onto this piece of paper as a temporary support. The sample I'm going to show you, the stitching effect, is a much larger piece, ready tacked onto my brown paper, and I'm going to use a larger, thicker thread just to make it bolder so you can see what I'm doing. And you can see that I've actually machined these strips of fabric on, but the fabrics have been folded over at the edge, so you're not stitching into a raw edge. Now the first gap I'm going to stitch into, I'm going to use a very familiar stitch to you, I'm sure. It's a herringbone stitch, where you take a little bit from one surface, shawl, edge, and then another little bite, little stitch in the top one, into the bottom. And you can leave whatever gaps you like between the stitching, but you don't go through the paper. You make it so that you're just using the paper as something to grip onto, so the fabrics don't slip apart from yourself. So here we go. You can make them quite close to. Quite long ones or short ones. You can have fun and play with that effect. The other stitch I'm going to show you is, I believe, a new one to the 22 project, and it is called Wheat Sheaf here. Wheat Sheaf stitch. And as you can see from here, I hope you can see, it looks like a little wheat sheaf. So it's several stitches back and forth across the gap. So I'll just do a little, add an extra stitch to this, as many stitches as you like actually, and then just turning it sideways just a little bit, and then do a blanket stitch or just a wrap around all the little block of stitches that you've just done, and then do another one just to secure it so that it doesn't slide around. You can do several more if you like. In fact, you could do lots of the straight stitches across, then thread up a different colour needle thread and do the top blanket stitch in a different colour. You can as you're doing this, have a think about it. Another stitch you could do is the blanket stitch, as we did across here. So the blanket stitch, where you've got a usual edge, which we've done before on edges, and the blanket stitch, do a few stitches on one edge of the gap, and then do a few stitches on the other edge of the gap. They'll be upside down, obviously. And again, you can space those out. You can make them longer, further away from the edge, or as you wish. The last stitch I'm going to demonstrate in this little video is the fly stitch, or perhaps you might think of it as a detached chain stitch. And I'm going to do this alternately up and down. So you've got the fly stitch or chain stitch formation. If I can show you that, then leave the needle there. So yeah, I hope you can see that. And then pull that through. So you've made your little loop. Well, you would do if my thread was long enough. So I've made the loop, and then you can make your tail as long as you wish, and then take it back into the edge of the fabric, and I'll do it once more the other way around, so you can see it's sort of a fly stitch across the void, or across the gap. Okay, so for the final, another one I'll do. So you've got a fly stitch a bit on the top, and then coming through to the bottom where the thread goes over the loop of the needle goes over the loop of the thread, and then you pull it through, and then decide exactly where you want to put the tail, I call it, on the edge. Now if I show you a few variations of that on this sample, here you've got the cretonne stitch, and these are black cretonne stitches changing to purple thread, and then another layer on top of pink. So you can have great fun with just choosing your colours and changing your threads, or even using those ombre threads that I'm so fond of. The wheatsheaf stitch, as you can probably see here, if I put this over my hand, you can probably see the black thread more clearly, of little blocks of a blanket stitch on top of the straight stitches, pulling them together, squeezing them into a wheatsheaf effect. And you notice there the gap is at an angle. That's quite interesting to do. And then the next one down at an angle again. So you can play around and do whatever you like with your gaps and how many gaps you wish to have. And here we have a laced blanket stitch, and that is a row and blanket stitch only on one side, then another row only on the bottom side, and then they're used as loops to gather lace in between, in and out, in and out. So it's meanders. I think these are a wheatsheaf one and another blanket stitch one. The one that I'm doing with my coloured small piece of fabric, I'm putting two little gaps in it. So I've folded those back and ironed them. Then I've tacked it onto the paper, and I'm starting to stitch across that really wide gap there with long fine threads, and a smallish little gap here and I'm needle weaving in and out of the stitches across the void. So you'll have to wait and see and have a look at the samples for the final completion. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a week's time on week 22, our final week.